Hey, Fidelity, how can I remember to invest every month?
With the Fidelity app, you can choose a schedule and set up recurring investments in stocks and ETFs.
Oh, that sounds easier than I thought.
You got this.
Yeah, I do. Now, where did I put my keys?
You will find them where you left them.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I'm joined by the professor of law at Chase Law School, Ken. Ken, welcome to our Constitution Midweek Show.
It's great to be back.
Yeah, this has been one of our, I think, most exciting projects. I know a lot of individuals have been excited beginning ours and want to get it all together. I hinted on the main show. We've got more coming, and we do. We got a lot of fun things in the future that are going to come out once we get done with all of the Constitution. But today, let's get right into the meat and to the fun of it all. We are dealing with the Sixth Amendment. So, Ken, we're leaving Reconstruction behind, and we're moving to the 16th Amendment. Now, the 16th Amendment is a really important one. Not that, again, the Reconstruction Amendments aren't, but it really lays the groundwork for the modern administrative state in the United States. The United States Constitution, as we've discussed earlier in the series, required that direct taxes be apportioned among the states according to their population. But the 16th Amendment makes some changes potentially. It says this, as we always start off with it, quote, "The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration," end quote. And those, again, if you've been with us from the beginning, enumeration, apportionment, those are really important keys. So what's going on here? So let me set us up. So taxation, any kind of direct taxation was really impractical at best in the United States prior to the 16th Amendment. And that's a feature, not a bug, of the U.S. Constitution. In a case we already discussed, Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust, way back in 1895, it held that taxes on incomes from properties were a direct tax and therefore had to be apportioned. In other words, be apportioned among the states. Again, going back to earlier episodes, the taxing clause of Article 1, Section 8 granted Congress the broad power, quote, power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, end quote. But it also provides twice that any, quote, direct tax has to be apportioned among the state on the basis of population. So this means if a tax is direct, so you got to figure out what that is, then a state with 1/10 of the national population has to bear 1/10 of its total liabilities. And it doesn't matter whether that one state has lots of whatever is being taxed, something like land, and another state has very little. The states have to bear it according to population. And that makes any kind of direct taxation cumbersome at best, and oftentimes, like it deals with population, maybe even impossible. So the 16th Amendment is adopted in 1913 explicitly to overcome those Article 1 limitations as they were understood in Pollock back in 1895. And the express desire is to overcome that ruling. And that's one of the things we've noticed. Sometimes one of the reasons we have amendments is to explicitly undo Supreme Court decisions. And that is what's happening here. And so The 16th Amendment provides a very clear constitutional basis for income tax. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the modern American state, because it takes direct taxes to that kind of revenue possible. Today, as a matter of fact, our largest source of income is direct income tax. Now, 3 years after the ratification of the 16th Amendment, we get some early questions specifically about the income tax. And I know you're going to get into some of this, Ken, but some of the big cases here that I look at and teach at, we get I'm mispronouncing that. Bersharber versus Union Pacific Railroad Company in 1916, just 3 years later after the 16th Amendment. And it's specifically looking at income tax and arguing it's unconstitutional because there was no appropriation requirement. And so too did Stanton v. Baltic Mining Company also in 1916. But both of those cases reinforce what it is. Now, we do get to some modern cases in the 20s and the 50s, but where do you start as you go through thinking about the 16th Amendment? I know for me with students, we often take a look at Eisner versus McComber in 1920, where the court strikes down some unappropriated taxes. But how do you approach, the 1924, or do you go back like I do and take a look? How does that work?
I'm going to make this fun. I'm going to go all the way back to 1787 at first. Because
wow.
Because as you pointed out, the 1787 Constitution, which you already sort of went through this, but I want to highlight some of the politics behind what you said. The Constitution of 1787 does give Congress taxing powers, and you read them. Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. So that's right there before we needed a 16th Amendment. But then there's also this qualification on how Congress can use that taxing power, and you mentioned, in fact, you correctly mentioned it's so important. It's in there twice. It appears in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, and then again in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4. Both of those clauses essentially say that direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers. And then that's rephrased as a negative in Article 1, Section 9. No direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census or enumeration herein before directed to be taken. So direct taxes must be apportioned. And as you also said, that makes it a cumbersome and difficult kind of tax to use. And so that does open up a little bit of a mystery that I want to explore a little bit. Why would the original 1787 Constitution, give us 4 different kinds of taxing powers, but then limit one of those 4, the one that's called taxes or direct taxes? Sometimes they just use the word taxes, but that means direct taxes. Why would they limit it so much as to make it useless? Why give it at all if you're going to do that? But the answer to that, like the answer to a lot of the mysteries in the Constitution, it's all about slavery. The apportionment requirement is a direct reflection of the 3/5 compromise. And the Constitution always gets its most euphemistic when we're dealing with slavery. And so if you forget about slavery being the issue, then it always becomes almost impenetrable to read. But the concept here was under the 3/5 compromise. The North and the South had exactly different ideas about for what purposes should slaves be counted as people and for what purposes shouldn't they be counted as people, and for what purpose should they be counted as property. So
to be careful there, maybe not so much people, but as persons.
As persons, persons, but not or property, right? So the South would say, well, for purposes of voting, we're not going to count them as persons for those kind of purposes. They can't vote; they're slaves. But on the other hand, for purposes of property taxation, well, they're people. They're not property, right? So the South wanted them. They wanted even a little bit more than what you're suggesting there, because not only did they not want them to count in terms of that's why I made that distinction of a people, if you will, but they wanted. The reason you get to the compromises is they did want them to count in terms of how many representatives particular states would get.
Now at Verizon Business, every business can get the new Samsung Galaxy S25 Plus. Whether you're a new customer, loyal customer, or returning customer, this one's for you, you, and you on America's most reliable 5G network. Get the new Galaxy S25 Plus on us, powered by Verizon Business. 256 gigabyte on us. New device payment purchase agreement, select trade-in, and business unlimited plan required. Credit varies by smartphone trade-in. Applied to account over agreement term up to 36 months. Terms apply. Limited time offer.
Yeah, exactly. They wanted to count them for those purposes, but not to let them vote and not to have them be taxed as property. Whereas
absolutely,
and
that's the key,
say,
right? So it's a person if you're enumerating for voting, but it's not a person if you're going to charge me for it, like you would say an acre of land.
Yeah. Yes. And so the North, of course, takes exactly the opposite position. The North says, well, your whole slave system treats slaves as property, not as people. So therefore, the federal government should tax them as property, and that tax should be paid by the slave owners. And they shouldn't be counting towards the number of representatives the state gets in Congress because they're property. They're not people, right? So the North is taking that position. So the 3/5 compromise compromises both. So it basically says that the slaves who will not be allowed to vote, they will be counted in the census, and 3/5 of their numbers will count towards representation in Congress and in the Electoral College. But on the other hand, the property value that they have as slaves, the dollar amount that they're worth, 3/5 of that can be taxed as property tax. So that's the 3/5 compromise. So the apportionment concept is actually meant to facilitate that. So the way that would work is there could be a capitation tax. So a capitation tax would be something like, well, every person has to pay $100 tax. It's just a head tax on being a person. But so that's necessarily apportioned in proportion to population. But then if it's a slave, it's 3/5 of that. So the slave pays the owner pays a $60 tax on the slave, whereas they pay a $100 tax on themselves and their family members. And since the slaves are being counted as 3/5, both for purpose of representation and for purpose of taxation, then the apportionment still works out. So it very much facilitates the idea that you can have property taxes on slave property taxed at the 3/5 rate, and that will be apportioned. But any other kind of tax you try to have, the apportionment requirement is probably going to make it difficult and cumbersome to use. And so that's why we really never did have too many federal direct taxes, except for the taxes on slave property. And then after the 13th Amendment eliminates slave property, we're left with kind of a vestige in our Constitution where we can still have direct taxes, but they have to be apportioned. And if they have to be apportioned, it's very hard to use them. And so we never use them. So there don't end up being many direct taxes.
Well, and you also, since you bring that up, I mean, the other element here, and we think of this as being kind of given, but it wasn't at the time. It's really not until you get to like the era of the Bull Moose Party, where this becomes a more popular version. But the idea of having a progressive tax would also be almost impossible as a result of enumeration. Unfortunately, I have to end our ad-supported preview right there. So if you want to hear the rest of this episode with Ken and myself, you're going to need to become a supporter of the Politics Guys. You can become a supporter by heading to politicsguys.com/support or taking a look at the show notes. And don't forget, you're not just getting this upcoming 16th Amendment episode. You're getting all of the Constitution episodes that Ken and I have done over the last 3. That's right. 3 years. We're getting close to the end, and we've got fun things to come up with that, and I want you to be a part of that. So you need to become a supporter. Head to politicsguys.com/support, where you're going to get rid of the ads. You're going to get them straight from Patreon. It's wonderful. Now, if you can't, don't forget you can always email us at mail@politicsguys.com, and we can work some things out. But we would love for you to become a member. And nobody is more important to us than those members, including our executive producers level, who are just amazing. And they include Wilmer Marino, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. And we will be back, supporter or not, with a full episode this weekend, and I hope you'll join us then.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.